Hello guys, in this video we are going to learn how to add a fade out animation in React using the frame emotion library. The first point I want to talk about is why frame emotion. Now I chose to use frame emotion because animating HTML elements in React is a bit tricky when these elements are removed from the DOM. The reason why it is tricky is because React removes HTML elements from the DOM before the fade out animation has time to take effect. To solve this problem, frame emotion provides a dedicated component which is the AnimatePresence component. And essentially what this component does is that it delays the removal of the element to give the animation time to take effect before the element is removed. Let's see how this component works with a practical code example. As you can see, I have a simple React application that I created with Vite. For now, this application only has an app component that outputs a div with the hello text. Let's first start by creating the HTML element that we're going to animate in this tutorial. For the sake of simplicity, I chose to animate a simple header element. Let's create that element and set its text to animate header. Then I'll create two buttons to add and remove the header from the DOM. The first hide button will remove the header, and the show button will put the header back into the DOM. To add and remove the header, we need to create a state, and to do that we need to use the useState hook. So let me first import that from the React library. Then we'll create a state that we will call showHeader, and that's going to be a boolean, either true or false. If it is true, then we will show our header. If it's not, if it is false, we're not going to show it. We also need a function that is going to be able to toggle the value of showHeader. We're going to call this function setShowHeader. And we'll set this equal to useState, the hook. And the initial value is going to be set to true so that we show the header by default. Lastly, let's only show our header element when the showHeader state value is set to true. In order to do that, we first create a dynamic expression using curly braces, and we will use a JavaScript AND operator for the showHeader state value and the header HTML element. The way this operator works, this AND operator, is that it evaluates the expression from left to right, and only continues the evaluation if each element in the evaluation is true. Okay, so if the showHeader value is set to false, the animate header will not be evaluated, and then will not be output to the DOM. Let's now hide and show the header element using the two buttons that we created. To do that, let's first add an onClick event to the hide button. In this onClick event, we will add an arrow function that will set the value of the show title state to false, in order to remove the animate header from the DOM. Let's do the same thing for the show button, and set the value of the show title state to true instead. Let's try and see if these buttons work. So when I click on the hide button, the value of the show title state will be set to false and the header will be removed from the DOM. Okay, so it works. And inversely, when I click on the show button, the value of the show title state will be set to true and the header will be added back to the DOM. Now that our React code is working, let's work on our fade out animation. We will first start by downloading the frame emotion package. To do that, I will create a new terminal with this plus button, and I will install frame emotion with the npm install framer-motion command. To add an animation in frame emotion, we first need to import the motion component from frame emotion. This component is a special component that is supercharged with animation capabilities. Then, we need to add that component to the HTML element that we want to animate. To do that, I will go to my header element and I will add motion to the opening HTML tag as well as the closing HTML tag. The last step is to add the animation that we want. In our case, it's a fade-out animation that takes effect when the header element is removed from the DOM. The motion component has a dedicated attribute that animates elements out of the DOM. This attribute is the exit attribute. This exit attribute is an object that defines the properties that we want to animate. Let's animate the opacity property to 0 and the color property to red when the element is removed from the DOM. If we try to remove the header from the DOM, you can see that the animation does not take effect yet. The reason why it doesn't take effect is because we did not use the AnimatePresence special component that I talked about in the beginning of the tutorial. Let's first import these components from the frame of motion library. And the way these components works is that it needs to wrap the block of code that uses the animation. Let's do just that, so I'll wrap my block of code with the AnimatePresence component like this. And now the fade-out animation should work just fine. We could make this animation more visible by increasing its duration. To do that, we need to use the transition attribute, which is also an object that accepts multiple properties. The property that we are interested in is the duration property that we will set to 3 for 3 seconds. As you can see, the animation now is more visible given that it has a higher duration. The tutorial is now finished. It's important to note that the workflow we use works for all other exit animations and not just the fade-out type of animation. Right, so I'll leave a link to the AnimatePresence component documentation in the description, and I'll see you guys in the next tutorial.